an elephant, a survivor of countless seasons. Yet this season was different. This season was cruel. The
dry season at Addo had burned the land bare. Cracks split the earth like scars. Pools of water were no more than thin mud. The air itself carried thirst. And in the middle of it all, he limped. A mature bull elephant. His right front foot swollen, red, grotesque. An abscess, large, infected, oozing. Each step was agony. His weight pressed down like punishment. He staggered forward, but the herd did not wait. Elephants are family. They stay together. But even family cannot carry the dying. Slowly, he was left behind. His eyes told the story, half closed, lashes trembling, sadness buried in them. His ears drooped like torn flags in the wind. His trunk dragged across the ground. Heavy, lifeless, he found a puddle. Not water, mud, dark and shallow. Still, he lowered his trunk and drank. Small sips, barely enough to live. The wind shifted. The smell of dust, heat, and despair wrapped around his body. He tried to stand taller, but his legs shook. His massive frame bent like a tree before falling. And he gave up. The elephant closed his eyes. The sound of the herd was gone. Only silence. Only the weight of dying alone. But then, something moved. A black bird. Its wings caught the sunlight, sharp against the sky. It landed close, fearless, long curved beak, black feathers shimmering with hints of violet. It tilted its head, studying him, not with pity, with curiosity. The elephant shifted weakly, trying to move the injured foot. The swelling pulsed. The bird stepped closer. Tap. Its beak touched the wound. A pause. A breath. Then, crack. A sharp peck. The abscess burst. Yellow liquid spilled onto the dry earth. The elephant flinched. His whole body tensed. A trumpet of pain broke the silence. But then, relief. The throbbing dulled. The burning pressure eased. He shifted his weight, and for the first time in weeks, the pain lifted slightly. The bird worked again. Peck, peck. More fluid drained. The elephant exhaled, long and low. His trunk lifted weakly, swinging like a bow of gratitude. The bird chirped once, softly, then flew away into the endless sky. For a moment, hope returned. That night, the elephant rested longer than usual. His breathing steadied, his eyes softened. He thought he was saved. But nature is not so simple. Days later, the swelling returned, worse. The wound spread, turning. Red, hot, and angry. Pus oozed, foul-smelling, dripping onto cracked earth. Flies gathered in clouds. His skin twitched under their bites, but he could not fight them off. He could no longer stand without trembling. Walking became impossible. He lay beside the shrinking puddle, drinking only enough to survive the hours. The sun beat down on his back. His ribs showed faintly beneath his skin. His body, once strength and dominance, was wasting. Every breath rattled, labored. The land was silent. Only the buzz of flies. Only the smell of rot. He was dying. No herd, no hope, only silence. And yet, the story was not over. Because far across the sanctuary, 2 rangers walked the land. Men whose duty was not only to patrol, but to protect. They would stumble upon him. And when they did, the course of his life, and theirs, would change forever. But here, in the cracked earth, with the last drops of the puddle turning to mud, the elephant closed his eyes. He waited, for death or for a miracle. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a golden glow over the vast expanse of Addo Elephant Sanctuary. The air was still, heavy with the dust of the dry season, the land stretching endlessly in every direction. David Makona squinted against the glare as he wiped the sweat from his brow. his boots crunching against the parched earth. He had been patrolling this land for over 10 years, but today, the heat felt worse than ever. It wasn't just the sun. Something in the air felt different. Beside him, Samuel Kumalo moved with quiet efficiency, his eyes scanning the horizon. Samuel was younger, quicker on his feet, but there was a weight in his step today. They had both seen death on this land, both human and animal, but today something felt more urgent, more profound. The pair had been walking the reserve's water sources, checking the few remaining pools to ensure that the elephants and other animals could at least survive this brutal season. But they weren't just checking for water. They were checking for life. The sun's rays filtered through the sparse trees, casting long, jagged shadows across the cracked ground. The birds were silent today. It was too hot for them to be active. Only the occasional distant sound of a lion's growl could be heard, a reminder of the harsh balance of life in the wild. David turned to Samuel, his deep voice carrying a tone of concern. The land's drying up faster than we expected. The elephants, they need more than water now. Samuel nodded, his face hardened. I know. We may have to start preparing for casualties soon. If this heat doesn't break, it could be bad. The elephant's face was sunken, its eyes half closed. There was no sign of life in its gaze, only a deep, desperate exhaustion. It wasn't just the heat, it was the weight of weeks, maybe months, of suffering. David knelt beside the animal, his hands gently touching the elephant's trunk. There was no resistance, no movement. Hey there, David whispered softly, his voice calm but filled with concern. Can you hear me? The elephant barely twitched. Its breathing was slow, labored, too shallow for something so massive. David placed a hand on the tom, elephant's rough skin feeling for its pulse. It was weak. Samuel moved to the side, his eyes scanning the surrounding area. We need to call for help. This one's in bad shape. Without hesitation, Samuel reached for his radio. As he called for backup, David continued to check on the elephant. It wasn't just the swelling, it was the smell. The infection was obvious. The abscess was huge, and the yellow liquid that seeped from it was a clear sign of how much pain the elephant had been in. I've seen this before, David said grimly, speaking mostly to himself. The infection's bad. It's been here too long. Samuel spoke into the radio again, his face a mix of urgency and resolve. He turned back to David. Help's on the way, but we need to make sure it's still alive when they get here. David nodded, his voice steady as he spoke to the elephant. Hang on, help is coming. For a moment they were silent. The sounds of the bush, the distant birds, the wind all faded into the background. David's hand stayed on the elephant's trunk, the connection between man and animal palpable. He looked down at the elephant, its once powerful body now weak and frail. It seemed impossible that something so majestic could be reduced to this. Don't you dare give up, David muttered. Under his breath, the weight of the moment was too much to ignore. This elephant wasn't just another animal in need of rescue. It represented the entire struggle of wildlife in the sanctuary, the constant fight for survival against harsh conditions. And yet, here it was, alone, in pain, a victim of circumstance. David looked at Samuel. We can't let it die out here. Samuel met his gaze, a silent understanding passing between them. They weren't just rescuing an elephant, they were fighting for something larger, the sanctity of life, the preservation of what remained of this land, this species. The roar of an engine approached in the distance. The rescue team was coming. David and Samuel stood side by side, watching as the team arrived. The elephant's fate would now rest in their hands. The sound of the approaching rescue vehicle grew louder, cutting through the tense silence. The sun beat down mercilessly, and and David wiped the sweat from his forehead once again, his hands trembling from the urgency of the situation. He didn't look at Samuel as they stood together, watching the elephant's labored breathing. They didn't need words. Both men knew what was at stake. As the vehicle came into view, David's mind raced. The elephant wasn't just in pain, it was dying. The abscess, that grotesque, swollen mass on its right front foot, was a ticking clock. They had no idea how long it had been festering, but it was clear that without immediate intervention, the elephant wouldn't survive much longer. The vehicle screeched to a halt, kicking up a small cloud of dust. A team of wildlife vets and specialists jumped out, quickly moving into action. David stepped forward, his voice steady despite the weight of the situation. This elephant's in serious condition. The infection spread deep into the foot. It's been there for too long. His gaze didn't leave the elephant as he spoke. The lead vet, a middle-aged woman named Dr. Clara Johnson, nodded gravely. The massive creature, still weak from days of suffering, slowly raised its head, as if recognizing the man who had always been a constant in its life. There was something in the elephant's eyes, familiar, yet distant, resigned yet hopeful. The elephant, weak and trembling, raised its head and let out a low, rumbling sound, a sound that echoed across the dry, empty plains. It was a sound of defiance, of life clinging on despite the odds. David felt a surge of emotion, his heart swelling with a mix of pride and sadness. It wasn't just the elephant he was fighting for. It was a representation of everything the sanctuary had worked for, everything they had sacrificed. But the real conflict lay ahead. The team had managed to stabilize the elephant for now, but there was no guarantee of a full recovery. David knew that they were just buying time, and time was something they didn't have a lot of. "We can't keep it here forever," Dr. Johnson said, her voice tinged with concern. "We're doing the best we can, but we need to move it to a facility where it can be monitored more closely." David's stomach tightened. The nearest facility was miles away. Moving the elephant in its condition would be risky. The journey itself could be deadly. But what choice did they have? "You're right," Samuel agreed. "We need to get it out of here. But it won't be easy." David looked at the elephant, which was now beginning to regain some strength. Its breathing had steadied, and the swelling on its foot seemed to have lessened slightly. It was as if the animal itself was trying to make a stand. But David knew that its fight wasn't over. They still had to save it, to get it to safety, to ensure it had a chance to live. They needed to act quickly, but David couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to this situation. Something deeper, a sign that they were on the brink of something bigger, something that involved not just this elephant, but the future of the sanctuary and its inhabitants. As the team prepared to move the elephant, David felt a sharp pang of guilt. They were saving this one, but how many others would be left behind? How many more animals were suffering in silence, too weak to be noticed, too far gone to be saved? The rescue was a success in the immediate term, but there was a greater moral question lingering in David's mind. David glanced at the elephant, now resting more comfortably in the back of the vehicle. Its breath was steady, and the swelling in its foot had subsided somewhat, but David could still see the exhaustion in its eyes. They were making progress, but he knew that they were far from safe. The true test of the elephant's recovery had only just begun. But there was more to this story than just the recovery of a single animal. It was a story that involved survival, perseverance, and the future of the sanctuary itself. "Is it going to make it, David?" Samuel's voice broke through the quiet hum of the vehicle's engine. David turned his head to look at him, his mind heavy with the same question. "I don't know, Samuel," David replied, his voice calm but tinged with uncertainty. "The infection might not spread anymore, but there's still a lot of unknowns. We're doing everything we can, but we can't control everything." Samuel nodded, his face drawn with concern. "We've been doing this work for years, and we know that sometimes it's not enough." There was a bitterness in his voice, a weariness that came from years of seeing animals suffer from circumstances beyond their control. David knew exactly what Samuel meant. The sanctuary had been struggling for resources for years. There were too many animals, too few rangers, and not nearly enough funds to sustain the growing needs of the reserve. The sanctuary was built to protect elephants, but with climate change making conditions harsher and the land becoming less hospitable by the year, it felt as though they were fighting a losing battle. Yet every day, they kept pushing forward. Because for every animal saved, for every life protected, there was hope. But as the days passed, and they continued their journey to the veterinary facility, David couldn't shake the feeling that they were at a crossroads. At some point, a small, quiet thought crept into his mind. Was it enough to save just this? One elephant? Was it enough to patch up the wounds of a few animals while the sanctuary itself was slowly dying? Or did they need to do more? Something bigger? Something more sustainable? "David, you're quiet," Samuel said suddenly, breaking David's train of thought. "What's on your mind?" David hesitated for a moment. He knew he couldn't hide his doubts, but the last thing he wanted to do was worry Samuel any more than he already was. "I'm thinking about the sanctuary, about the future. We're barely keeping it afloat. We can't continue like this forever." Samuel's gaze hardened, and for the first time in a long while, David saw a flicker of fear in his colleague's eyes. "You're right," Samuel said softly. "It's a hard truth, but it's a truth we can't ignore." The conversation hung in the air, unspoken but understood. They both knew what it meant for Addo Elephant Sanctuary to struggle in silence for years, and they both knew what it would mean if it ultimately failed. The vehicle hit a bump in the road, and the elephant let out a low groan in response, its trunk curling slightly in distress. The rangers turned their attention back to the animal, but the conversation from moments ago lingered in the quiet tension of the vehicle. The veterinary facility came into view, its buildings standing like quiet sentinels against the sprawling savanna. The last stretch of the journey felt like a lifetime, each second dragging as if it was stretching the very fabric of time. David felt the weight of his decision press down on him once again. But just as he began to think about what was to come, the vehicle came to a sudden halt. The screech of the tires and the abrupt stop jolted David from his thoughts. He looked around quickly, unsure of what was happening. Samuel opened the door before David could ask, his face pale. "David, get out here," Samuel called urgently. "We have a problem."